There's 3 of us, but all of us need to pull together the lessons learned as we apply them not only to U.S. Japan, but to U.S. Japan working in the Asia Pacific. We have one person from FEMA who's focused on radiological concerns, and we'll ask him to speak first. What are the lessons for the future? What should we be applying today? His name is Tim Greten. He has been holding jobs within policy analysis as well as in hazards within FEMA. You can check his resume or bio on the sheet. Tim?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here this afternoon. I'm aware that I'm between you and the nicest day we've had in Washington in months, so I will be brief. What I wanted to touch on briefly today was how we've applied many of the lessons that we've seen from both the Japanese and the American side and tried to incorporate that into U.S. doctrine and then execute that at the federal, state, and local level. We've been very, very fortunate to have outstanding allies in the Japanese and have been able to work closely with them since Fukushima. In my case specifically, the Japan Nuclear Regulatory Agency and the Cabinet Ministry for Emergency Management as part of a joint American-Japanese working group to work through what information we could provide them with as the Japanese were updating their emergency plans with an eye to making sure that they could restart their nuclear fleet safely and effectively with better emergency plans. And on the American side, certainly not just see what had happened in the immediate aftermath of Fukushima, but work very closely with the Japanese to get the most information we could about the very valuable and original experiences that the government and industry are having there in coping with the aftermath of Fukushima, specifically the nuclear power plant emergency, and what's going to be done to do the cleanup there and revitalization of that community. The United States emergency management has been growing steadily over the last half century, especially since 9/11. There's been a number of disasters here. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, the Deepwater oil spill off the southern coast of the United States. And as part of that fabric, we've been learning from the lessons from Fukushima and incorporating that into the general trend. We've been updating national doctrine, the national preparedness system, the national preparedness goals, frameworks, core capabilities, and plans, and exercising these documents and doctrines with our state and local partners. In the United States, emergency management really starts at the local level. There, where the action is, and the state backstops the locals and the feds backstop the states. That being said, there's certain responsibilities and capabilities that only really exist at the national level, especially for specific technological hazards, such as a radiological emergency like a nuclear power plant accident or an atomic bomb going off or something like that. After we've updated our doctrine and socialized it to the state and locals, we have worked very hard to do new exercises, to do new kinds of exercises, because a lesson learned is one thing. A lesson learned that's in a plan is a bit better, but actually forcing folks to grab that doctrine and use it during an exercise or during a real-life event is really where change happens. And those lessons learned become lessons realized as part of what the updated status quo is. Two exercises that we've done recently include Southern Exposure 2015. It was a nuclear power plant accident in South Carolina, or a simulated exercise last summer. The Japanese were observers there, and it was the biggest exercise we'd ever had of this kind, several thousand participants. And we used Department of Energy assets, South Carolina assets, FEMA assets, and worked through both immediate response items, and also got into the much knottier questions of recovery. What kind of decisions would need to be made? How would those decisions be implemented and funded? Who was responsible for what? What unanswered questions remained? And conversations about that went to the very senior levels of the government, to the national security staff, and are continuing to be worked. On the earthquake side of things, there's a large exercise going on this springtime in the Pacific Northwest called Cascadia Rising, based on the Cascadia Fault, or if there was, God forbid, ever an earthquake up there and a resulting earthquake and tsunami. What would we need to do there? And certainly one of the lessons we've learned repeatedly at disasters that was reinforced by the experiences of our Japanese allies is if you have a large disaster, there's very limited emergency response capability, and it takes a while to bring that to bear. And citizens and local communities need to be prepared to help themselves while the cavalry arrives. It may take days, and it may take a long time to get to help all the affected folks. FEMA continues to look ahead to what our, broader responsibilities and goals are. Really, ultimately restoring communities and helping folks help themselves so that they can get on with their lives and communities can be reborn, perhaps in an even better shape than they were before the disasters. One last thing I'll focus on is there have also been a number of very unique capabilities that I would consider to be lessons realized from the radiological event in Japan at Fukushima. Notably, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission looked very closely at everything that happened. The near-term task force was what they call that effort. And they have focused closely with the U.S. industry and their Japanese allies on making improvements to nuclear power plants and certain tweaks they could make. But one other thing they've done is called the FLEX program. They've stationed additional equipment to provide water and other capabilities that the Japanese experience show that you really need during this kind of an emergency, and have stationed those both at the actual power plant sites, but also in large amounts in Arizona and near the FedEx airport facility in, I believe it's Tennessee, near, I think it's Nashville. Thank you. And have figured out how would that equipment be deployed, including prearranged task orders or mission assignments with the United States military and the National Guard to bring that specialized equipment to the somewhat remote locations many U.S. nuclear facilities are in if there was ever an emergency. So I think we have realized a lot of lessons from all of this, but I also don't want to sound complacent and don't want to sound like there's a lack of urgency or certainly a lack of imagination. Building capabilities and teaching people how to think is really what prepares you for the unimaginable or the worst day you could possibly have. And I'll close out by saying we continue to work closely with our Japanese allies, and we continue to try to help any way we can as they go through their recovery and also incorporate the lessons they're learning into our strategies. Thank you very much.
General Yamaguchi is another Japanese with numerous U.S. universities behind his name, both Tufts and Harvard. He's been the senior defense attaché here in Washington. He's been teaching at NDA, National Defense Academy. Now he's at the International University. And right after 3/11, he was asked to be a special advisor to the cabinet handling this crisis. General Yamaguchi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me
To this very important occasion. And to be honest, I was mobilized right after the 3/11 by Khan administration, DPJ administration. Even though I'm not a Democrat, I'm sort of Republican. Used to be. What I did most at the cabinet, the Prime Minister's office, was dealing with information and communication. And I found that the information, particularly after, immediately after disaster, is really important. Who needs what where, and who can help them from where. Those kinds of information. If there is no communication between those helpers and sufferers, you don't see effective rescue operations. In that sense, communication infrastructure was quite critical in Tohoku area. It is easy to imagine that after tsunami, all that critical infrastructure, including communication infrastructure, was totally damaged. Good news is most of the part, the mobile phone got recovered within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. So everybody became able to use a mobile phone within three weeks. But one part, particularly around the Fukushima Daiichi, particularly 20 kilometer radius of Fukushima Daiichi was the last part where recovery was done. It took more than 1 month. 20 kilometer radius from Fukushima Daiichi was a place where everybody was supposed to be evacuated. But in fact, there remained tens of people. Some of them refused because of illness or because of oldness. They refused to leave, and caretakers of them, of course, had to remain there. Do you imagine? Can you imagine what was the communication devices for them to outside? Actually, most real-time communication was occasional visit of city hall or mayor's office or police or fire guard or SDF helpers, maybe once every two days. And those who are suffering from illness and oldness, the most necessary people to evacuate are there without any kinds of communication devices. That was really serious problem. And that is one of the things really serious to me. But if you look at military capability, SDF deployed 7,800 people on the day. The second, within day 3, there were 60,000 troops on the field. Within 6 days, 106,000. And among them, out of 600,000 service people, there were huge number of general officers. General officers do not work as hard as young enlisted or captains or lieutenants. They are actually usually useless. But secret is all the general officers have headquarters. Headquarters are equipped with communication devices. All the division, to be honest, 5 division commanders and 4 brigade commanders were there with communication signal battalions. Those battalions are capable of setting hundreds of phones, like you use, phones on the field. Within 3 days, half of the part of suffering area were covered by the SDF military phone system. And out of the static phone, there were a number of thousands of radios. So most of the part were covered by military communication. Within 6 days, everywhere in the suffering area was covered by phone, by military. So, very little people got aware of that capability of military. So if I were there and suffering, and I didn't know where my brother is or my son is, I would ask, men in uniform and with radio, my son is supposed to be there. I'd like to see if he's okay or not. This is not what happened. In the future, if this happens again, military might have to think about utilizing these communication capabilities for the public purpose too. And I have only 3 points. The third point is it didn't go worse. But one of the things I was very much worried was the large-scale power failure in Tokyo may cause the loss of power to supply communication infrastructure. Usually, mobile phones are supported by electricity. This time, electricity was a problem, and we thought if there was any very serious electricity shortage, Tokyo power may go down. Then the good news is mobile station has backup generators run by engine, run by kerosene, using kerosene. But bad news, it lasts only couple of days. So first thing I did when I got to the Prime Minister's office was to find out how many days mobile station can last in Tokyo. And then next thing was find out kerosene stockpile. And kerosene was so popular, it was still cold, and everybody was going to gas stations. So the Prime Minister's office really seriously worked hard to secure kerosene for mobile stations backup. As such, information is what we might have to think about more seriously in the future. I'd like to propose the idea that why don't we take information communication as samely important goods as medicine, food, water, and other supplies. Without information, those supplies cannot work effectively. So government have to be aware of this, and we may have to think about the NGO specialized into providing communication devices to the suffering area. To be honest, there was an NGO during this operation specialized in medical service. First thing they did when they deployed was delivered iPad and iPhones and satellite phone to suffering areas to gather their information where they have to go and what kinds of diseases are going. That is pretty much important. And another lesson learned from this particular disaster in terms of communication infrastructure is if something happened in Tokyo, we might have serious problem of communication. So we need to have backup. Keywords are backup and ad hoc. And backup satellite phones or multi-channel radio. We have a bunch of stockpiles in the disaster depots. That should be prepared for the emergency as a backup. But another point is ad hoc. Tokyo has a number of different communication networks, not only public one. But, for instance, even TEPCO has one. Private network, and railway companies or the toll road organization has their own lines of communication. If say 50% of them survive, why don't we connect them to form ad hoc network? This is exactly what TEPCO did when after 3/11, TEPCO workers in Fukushima Daiichi used to use public handy phone system, PHS, inside the TEPCO. But because of power failure, their only way of communication is voice, loud voice. But after a couple of days later, they came to know that their optical line from Tokyo to Fukushima Daiichi can be connected to KDDI or the private mobile phones. And after then, they were able to use particular kinds of mobile phones. That is a typical way to make ad hoc communication network using private and public phones. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's only 3 of us. I'm a panel member too, as well as chairman. I would like to raise several issues that are different than the rest of Asia Pacific. The U.S. and Japan. When we ask for help, as we did in Katrina, we got more than 70 responses. We had no idea how to handle these. Our State Department had to clear. AID, which works overseas, suddenly became the recipient. I'm not going to tell you where a lot of those things went, but they didn't make their way down to Katrina. They were inappropriate. But we were pretty lost. Hurricane Sandy, we allowed 3 countries to assist. In the case of this disaster, there were 113 countries that proffered assistance, 176 that gave assistance. MOFA was just overwhelmed. Who's going to handle all of this coming in? Japan Platform works overseas. They don't work within country. They did have experience in 2004 and 2006 with 2 earthquakes in Niigata. There were a few who helped that were members of Japan Platform. Otherwise, the NGOs that most of us knew worked overseas, whether it's GEN, whether it's Peace Winds, whether it's AAR. Now suddenly, these NGOs had to work in country because the other NGOs in Japan are so small. Even though they may have been in Tohoku and they had that accent and they knew what was needed, it was almost impossible for these internationals to link with them. And there was nobody to help link. Gaimusho said, wait, we want to do an assessment, we want to know what our needs are, and then we welcome you. Well, there's no visa requirement in Japan for almost all of us. We just started coming. As the ambassador said, DART had arrived on the scene, and DART tried to give directions or say, connect with Jen. Jen's working in Sendai. Well, I don't even know Jen. Do I want to go there? Most internationals that came in had no linguistic ability. You're a very rare person, doctor. So they came in and really floundered. Assessments. Who could do assessments, as Yamaguchi-san raises? You couldn't get up to the field. You tried to connect. Most local officials were either not there or they couldn't be bothered. So we began delivering what we thought was needed. Fortunately, we could hire small trucks because the military, with their large trucks, couldn't even make it up on the roads. I mean, there wasn't that assessment done. So here comes the NGOs trying to do assessments or try to share information. And as was raised earlier, the NGOs tend to compete. They're competing for money, although a lot came with money. The Huffington Post, 2 weeks after the tsunami, alerted their readers that these international NGOs, up in their right-hand corner on their face page, reserve the right to move the funds should a crisis be greater in another part of the world. Wow. That's a pledge to help Japan, but maybe not. We raised approaching almost $1 billion. The Americans are generous. Of that reached the U.S., that reached Japan, we really question. Most of it went to relief. You're not going to continue into recovery unless you have a partner, because you can't communicate. You can't really work with the local people. So this became very critical. I wish that we could have somehow linked that rich international NGO with a sophisticated or at least knowledgeable local NGO. And when the international NGO said, hey, I can't communicate, I can't do much, but here's 50,000. Just report how you use it, because I have to report back home. So most of the international NGOs departed. Very few of us stayed through recovery. So I think we sold our generous U.S. people a bill of goods. And worse, the Japanese didn't get what the Americans and Brits, Canadians, had promised or had pledged. So that's a real problem in international assistance. When we look at the U.S. Japan, we don't have what they call the cluster system. Now, almost every Asia-Pacific country has a cluster system. The cluster system was started by the UN, by UN OCHA, and these were areas, specialties, where people could assist. I'm a telecommunications NGO, I'm going to the telecommunications cluster. I'm a health NGO, I'm going to the health cluster. And at that cluster sits the military, local officials, central government officials, and what are you doing? Oh, you're doing this area? Well, we'll do this area. Oh, do you need help? I have no logistic capability. Well, the military can help move you. So this just didn't happen because we didn't have anything like this in Japan. We don't have anything like this on the West Coast when we have our big earthquake. Sure, Seattle, where I'm located, has some kind of clusters within King County and within the Seattle Office of Emergency Management. But the outsiders need to participate in that. So that was a key element in most of Asia Pacific. Those are the ones who assess as well as discuss who's doing what where. So how can we help each other? Do you want to add to that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Totally different aspect. But in 311's case, no, we talk about the cluster system or civil military operation, the cooperation center sort of thing. But assuming the local governance is not so high. I used to envy some other cases where government was not working. President and couple of ministers and helpers, maybe up to 2,000 of people are gathering in a small room and decide everything in a room for rescue operations. But in case of 3/11, all the ministries and agencies are totally intact, and local government as well. So that means they worked quite well. But in addition to their governance, stovepipes remained intact. It was really fact. And at the local level, all the information comes to the prefectural level. Whole picture can be drawn. But some of the government officials seconded from central agency sort out those needs and situations in accordance with the ministerial agencies. This is for financial ministry, this is for defense ministry, this is for police. And then when all the information comes to Tokyo, they are stovepiped. So it was really hard to figure out what is the whole picture. Except for the military, military operations center tries best to draw a whole picture. But military during the 3/11 rescue operation was one of the ministries with other ministries. So military information held by military was not able to, was not supposed to widely share. That was my own problem.
Earlier today, we heard Colonel Koch say that the JSDF wanted to know, what can you do for us? What capabilities you have? Every disaster, this is asked. When we go to the Philippines, what are you proffering? What can you do? Hey, we can set up your airport. Oh, welcome. Now we're trying to write TORs, or terms of reference, so that the Philippines, frequently hit by disaster, knows the capabilities of the JSDF. Here's what they can proffer. Here's what they can deliver. Here's what the 3 MEB can deliver. So it's almost like a checklist, updated frequently. So people know. The Japanese are not going to come immediately. That's fine. 3 MEV lean so far forward that they're there before the accident or the disaster hits. It's wonderful. Okay, perfect. The Japanese stay longer, the U.S. comes early. Great partnership. Great partnership for the Philippines. Great partnership for Myanmar. But Myanmar should know this. And this is what we have to proffer. Now, ask the Japanese JSDF, who are the best NGOs to work with? What? Ask the U.S. Marines. They have been so trained, or so many programs with DART, they're beginning to know. They know the limitations, the capabilities, the timing. This is critical. When I saw JSDF delivering blankets in Tohoku, I said, no, there's too many NGOs that can do this. You're heavy lift. And then I thought, but you are winning the hearts and the minds of those people in Tohoku. Maybe this is your strategy. But we shouldn't do that. The military should stay in their expertise, heavy lift, search and rescue, surveillance. I would love to see the SDF move into engineering, but they're not. Your peace group is into engineering, but not your HADR. Because nobody can build roads, I saw it in Sohoku, nobody can build bridges and roads like your ground self-defense force, your engineers. So we have this big gap between the military and the NGOs. Then we saw Maritime Self-Defense Force. Do you know what Ground Self-Defense Force is doing? Do you know what 7th Fleet is doing? This is ad hoc. It happened. We had some LNOs, liaison people on the Japanese on the Ronald Reagan. They were sharing information. That happened to be ad hoc. Ad hoc because of training programs, because of some personalities, but this should almost be a requirement. We saw big changes in Haiyan when the superstorm hit Philippines. The ISE, the Maritime Self-Defense Force, came down and they welcomed 2 U.S. Osprey to land. We just said, whoa, what's happening? NGOs have to come and they have to be sustainable if they arrive. Sustainable means you can't take that place of that survivor. You got to take care of yourself. You can't push him out of the evacuation center. The senior commander of the ISE said, we should have Japanese NGOs stay here. Whoa! We thought, but these are the changes. How do we bring NGOs together? How do we bring the various militaries together? And then on assessments, how do they work together? When Hagupit hit, Typhoon Hagupit, there was a 10-person team that came and did an assessment from Japan. Where do you think those 10 people were from?
Check.
They were from MOD, MOFA, and JICA. We'd never seen anything like this. This is what we're trying to do. The lessons learned, how do we build on each other's capabilities?
Yes, yeah. Totally different point of view, but the HADL operations abroad can provide us with a kind of neutral ground. Even the peacekeeping operation too. You know the difficulties between Japanese and Chinese and Japanese and Koreans. But if you go to South Sudan, Chinese soldiers, Korean soldiers, and Japanese soldiers working together for the same purpose. So in such case, why can't alliance do the sort of similar business with other countries to be better, to have better strategic environment? In addition, people may know this quite well, but every disaster is local. And local means there is no similar or even the same kinds of disaster. You cannot see the same. I have different from U.S. military forces. Self-defense forces are tasked to help locals in case of disasters. Even the small camp commander can make a decision to dispatch their troops. That is the fundamental mission. Japanese self-defense forces' fundamental mission to be with our people. That make us very, very comfortable. If we have to stand up, they will help. For that purpose, we will, in a pragmatic way, we will win hearts and minds of Japanese and to be safer. So in that sense, disaster relief for us in Japan after 1945 somehow may be different from others. Maybe every military has different missions, mandates on the disaster relief, but Japan has a special case. So you may look as doing a little bit too much, but this is what we have been trained and we have experienced and we have learned this is the best.
I think another issue is the coordination. When we go to the Philippines for a disaster, our requirement is to be impartial, neutral, and maintain the sovereignty of the host nation. So the Philippines sets up an MNCC, Multinational Coordination Center. They are in charge. The militaries proffer assistance, it's accepted, and they try to inform the militaries where to go. This is the standard procedure now. This has been difficult in the U.S. Do we have a mechanism like that? In Japan, we had Yokota, Ichigaya, and then, of course, Sendai. Japan Platform tried to set up an Iwate Coordination Center and a Miyagi Coordination Center among the NGOs, but there were just local NGOs. We attended once or twice, but that sharing of information wasn't there. So in a future disaster, how do we work under some coordination center with Japan being sovereign?
Right. But there is no such a thing as one-fits-all sort of coordination mechanism. Disaster is always local, and some small NGOs, maybe 3 or 4 people, cannot attend every meetings.
Sure.
So there should be, we have to be realistic enough, and we have to be really flexible. Sometimes, like we did in Thailand after tsunami, U.S. Marine Corps headquarters was a center of information. Information, as information gathers, people gather, and the more information comes, and the better integrated operation can be possible. So as such, whenever we face the disaster, we have to be flexible and find out new ways, best way in particular situations. And UN OCHA is one, and also we have to be realistic enough that sometimes we need to help us. Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines is the case, where the people who are with very, very goodwill to help locals, they suffered. They were not able to even feed themselves or even move around the area. Without knowing that we have to help each other to maximize the different organizations' capabilities for the local people.
So kind of in conclusion, how do we better assess? How do we meet those assessments? In the case of Haiyan, the Filipinos said, we don't need all these doctors. We have a pretty good medical system here, but we do need supplies. So how do we find this out when the U.S. and Japan are so strong? How can we assist the Philippines? How can we assist Vietnam? Then with Vietnam, Philippines remaining sovereign, I think it was really critical that the U.S. became an operational support
One thing,
for Tohoku.
Filipinos.
I think we do agree, but
Yeah, I agree, but the Filipinos really appreciated the U.S. capability of information provision, particularly damage assessment by the imaginary information. That is what we have in record. And Filipinos appreciated Japanese flying things and supplies,
Absolutely.
right? So
The supplies.
I think there is no other countries than the United States can provide the information necessary for disaster, after disaster damage assessment. This is really important. Otherwise, PKO tend to go to the place where 3D cameras are. So damage assessment is one of the key things, and those
Sure.
that
And
highly
sharing.
appreciated.
Okay, I think we'll close and turn it over to, yeah. We got 5 minutes before we need to be out of here. But thank you for listening to us.
We've all been involved in putting together many conferences over the years for our different organizations. I have to tell you, participants, that this one was a little different. I have never seen a group sort of self-form the way that participants did in this conference. There was an initial brainstorming session. Somebody in the group would say, well, Dr. Ramani really ought to be here. You got to meet this guy. And the call would go out, and he'd say, sure, I'm in. It was just an incredibly organic process of people who knew one another and who thought that this other person who'd been a partner in an experience that was very important to them should participate. And in almost every case, the partners showed up. So you participants, panelists, you all chose each other, and what a wonderful job you did. I think all of us, even those of us who had studied this incident pretty carefully, learned a great deal from virtually every panel. So my thanks to all of you participants, and I hope it formed as a little bit of a reunion for you, thinking back to a time in which there was great tragedy, but there was also great self-fulfillment and formation of friendships that lasted a long time. And to those of you who came to learn about, especially those of you who stayed to the end, thank you very much for your attendance. I think in this, not only in this final panel, but all the way along, there were some things that I think we should think about in terms of mentally preparing it, sometimes even physically preparing for things that might happen. It's very clear that all actions that were taken ahead of time, everything from an action taken 50 years ahead of time in which a building was built with the right kind of construction, to action that was taken a few hours ahead of time just to get the right person in the right place, paid off in terms of saved lives, fewer injuries, faster recovery. So I think all of us who are not actually involved in 3/11 response have things that we should apply to our own lives. I'm certainly going to increase the number of gallons of water I have in my basement after thinking about this. So anyway, to panelists, to those of you who attended, to the staff of Sasakawa USA and the U.S. Japan Council who really made it happen, the staff here at the Army Navy Club who are such gracious hosts, thanks very much to all of you. And you now have two choices. You can go catch the last of a glorious day, or you can have a beer upstairs. Your call. Thank you very much.